Welcome everybody again to another episode of Grow Yourself podcast. A podcast that we host meaningful conversations with interesting and skilled and educated and knowledgeable and insightful people, all for the purposes of helping you and me and everybody else learn, grow, and change from the inside out. You know, Especially for those of you who have, seen this podcast before, sometimes I might tell the same story or the same anecdote over and over. Why? Because I forget. Okay, there you have it. But I want to bring this up because it's relative to this really fascinating and insightful guest that I have here. I often refer to one of my mentors, a guy named Jim Rohn, wrote many books, incredible lecturer, speaker, really a thought leader in so many different ways. He used to go into, and he called his thing, whether it was a keynote, he always called them lectures, but he often liked to go to universities and lecture to younger people and younger professionals. And sometimes he would start his lecture with a simple question of, how tall will a tree grow? And of course, he would then begin to interact with the students, and they would give their input, and they say, well, it depends on the tree and when the environment and how much nutrients and all these other sorts of things. And he would hear it all and bring it out this what becomes an obvious point. And he rounds it off by saying, well, all of those are correct, of course. He said, but the real answer is a tree will grow as tall as it can, given all these circumstances. And of course, what he then does is turn that whole concept, that metaphor, into the idea of personal growth and about human potential, that, that we will learn, grow, and change only to the degree of what we put into it, the lessons that we learn in life. And that also potential is one of those things, it's unknown. We don't know how tall the tree will grow, nor do we. It depends on these things and that thing and this, including genetics. Same thing for people, So, but his main point is that, we as human beings are the only living organisms, on this planet that can choose to grow. We have consciousness and these other sorts of things. And so today we're going to talk about these things, about potential, untapped potential, asking questions like, how to be great, tapping into your greatness. And as a matter of fact, I would even, will begin with this guest asking about what is greatness? What is that? I mean, because so many people, especially today, where there's so much information, we think about, you can be, great. You can be anything that you want to be, all of these other sorts of things unlock the greatness within many people now, kind of really see them as platitudes. But my guest doesn't. And by the way, nor do I. So my guest will bring on some ideas, even some answers. In fact, he's going to offer five keys to greatness. And it's based on a really terrific book that he's written. So let me just introduce you to him here. My guest is Ari Gunzburg. He's an award-winning speaker, personal growth coach who presents his popular keynote, Everyday Greatness, based on his award-winning book, The Little Book of Greatness. You're going to love this, I'm telling you. The book is a parable that teaches the 5 keys to greatness. It's a framework that he has developed, and he developed it in a simple way that you can carry out in your life. Ari had an incredible, and this is what the book is based on. He had incredible, I shouldn't say necessarily based on, but in part some of it comes out of it. But certainly his speaking and his coaching and his insight comes from this incredible, but rather unique, but certainly traumatic experience as a child that was then followed by extreme volatility as a teenager. But then at some point, he chose to break those chains. And I mean the chains of trauma that often hold people back, and uses them as now guides and lessons for his own life. But even more, he uses these experiences, his story, the lessons he's learned, not only as motivators to propel him forward, but also as life lessons to motivate others, to learn, grow, change, be triumphant, be successful, be great. And so it's really quite a pleasure, a real honor to have Ari Gunzburg. And so let me introduce to you my guest. Ari, so good to have you, my friend.
Kevin, thank you so much. So good to be here. So much to unpack from all that you just said. First off, you had mentioned that Jim Rohn starts off with a question all the time. I start off my lecture, or as I like to call it, keynote, because keynotes pay better usually. But yeah, if you're in the business, if you know, you know. But I like to start it off with a question of, what does greatness mean to you? Because I think I realized at some point when I was having this conversation about greatness that a lot of people, I think, feel that greatness is unattainable. It's not achievable. And really, truly, actually, our own personal greatness, or as I call it, our own everyday greatness, is always achievable. So as long as we have a definition of what greatness means to us, it allows us to go ahead and do our part to go ahead and unlock that greatness and define that greatness and do everything we can to achieve it. One of the things that I bring out of my speech is the Cambridge Dictionary. One of the definitions for greatness is the better quality of something.
Oh, wow.
And that's key, because
that.
we get to define what that something is. If it is the better quality of being a great mom or being a great dad, if it is the better quality of being a great friend or being, available to people when they need your help, whatever it is that makes the most, creates the most meaning for yourself, that's what greatness means to you. And so the whole focus of everything is to just work on unlocking your own greatness, right? Because what's greatness for you, how you would define it, does not necessarily mean that it will fit into my life.
Wow. I love that you opened this whole conversation with just that alone, because, and I know in the field that we're in is, if you ask somebody or talk to people, I happen to be a youth tennis coach as well. So I kind of do that just as a bit of a community, my community working with young people, 11, 12, 13-year-olds. And if you mention, hey, you can be great, sometimes they just kind of fall back. They're like, I don't know about that. By the way, with grownups, you could say the same thing as, you could be great someday. And they just, that word makes them go, no, don't think so. But as you just defined it, man, that's phenomenal.
My brother has a theory that if you ever talk to people about real stuff, not everything, but like stuff that maybe they're a little bit hiding from their conscious mind and whatnot, you call them out on some of their crap, maybe, or whatever it is. Like the vast majority of people just boom, shut down. Like, nope, not going to talk about it. La 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 la.
No, don't want to hear it.
Yeah, like oh, well, maybe it would be better for you if you did X, and they're like, no, So it's just an interesting thing to gain the extra perspective of, well, this is what would make the most difference to me, and then then the 5 keys are just a focal point or a framework to go ahead and unlock that. And again, right, I would like to call it, I'd like to call it more of a gift than anything else, because it's like, once I hand it over to somebody, a lot of people with their self-help programs, they have a very specific thing that they want you to do in a very specific order. And to me, that's why I call it not a system or a program. I call it a framework, right? It's just 5 keys. If you want to spend much more time on key 1 and much less time on 2, 3, 4, 5, it's your thing, right? If you want to spend a lot more time on number 5 and a lot less time on number 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, your thing. Do your thing.
And you may have to jump back, so it's not step by step, but you may have to go back to the first idea, or whatever the case might be. So listen, before we get locking into that, let me just ask, who is Ari Gunzburg, and what defines you? I know you've got this really, really interesting story, and I just can't help but to ask you to tell it to our audience. It's fascinating. But beyond that, you're coming to us from Baltimore, is that correct?
I'm currently in Baltimore, yes.
You're currently in Baltimore. So just who is Ari? Tell me about who you are.
So you wanted to jump into the story from when I was
a
kid?
You could start off maybe a little bit about, where you grew up and this, that, and the other, and then certainly jump into that story, because it's fascinating.
Sure. So I grew up in Baltimore. For the most part, we moved from Silver Spring when I was like 5 or something, a little tidbit. I tell people I'm from Baltimore, but technically Silver Spring. Okay. They're an hour away. They're less than an hour away from each other. So I feel like, and most of the time you say Silver Spring, people are like, what?
Yeah.
Anyways, So when I was 10 years old, we had a class trip, and it was like going into the summer season. It was a class trip for a, quasi holiday that we have, but it was a few days late. And we went to play some baseball, then we went for a hike. And while we were out in the woods, so this is the 90s. So while we were out in the woods, it was just the teacher and us. There was no chaperones or anything. So there's 17 of us hiking in the woods with him. And while we were out there, he just fell over. Nobody knew what happened. Nobody was sure if he was okay or not. Some kids, we had spread out a little bit on the trail. Like some of us were, including myself, were up ahead playing in a stream. So some kids ran over, they screamed at us that he was hurt. We were like, this doesn't make any sense. Eventually we realized that they were telling the truth and not joking. So we ran back, and we're all sitting there in like shell shock, like no idea what to do. Like it's a beautiful, beautiful day. The green of the forest is just bright and everywhere, right? The leaves from the last year on the ground, and he's like laying on top of them and everything. And we're all just like, huh? Like, what in the world are we supposed to do now?
How old? I'm curious. How
10.
old?
10.
Wow.
Fourth grade. End of fourth grade.
Gracious.
Yeah. Like when my daughter ended up in fourth grade and everything, and I was like sitting there, I'm like, this is how old I was when it all happened. Yeah, it's kind of like a mind trip. Okay, so we're all sitting there. We're like, okay, time to go for help. And we got into a little bit of an argument about which way was the right direction. So we ended up splitting up into 3 groups. 7 kids stayed behind with him, 7 kids went one direction, and me and 2 other kids went another direction. On our way out of the woods, we're not really sure exactly where to go.
Yeah.
We're trying to find our way out of the woods, and there was a guy playing the bagpipes on the outskirts of the woods. So we hear the music, and we're like, oh, carnival, let's go to the carnival, people. And we got there, and it's just a guy wearing a kilt playing the bagpipes. But, so I really believe that was like one of those situations where this guy like woke up, and for no reason that he could imagine, he had this compulsion to get up and play the bagpipe. He's like, I don't know why, but I just need to go practice here today, right now. And meanwhile, that was the, what do you call it? The call, the siren's call or something, like I'm trying to reference that thing, but the call that brought us out of the woods.
Wow.
Right. And I think that it brought the other 7 kids. I think they got a little lost going the way that they went, but I think that they also probably ended up hearing the music and came out of the woods because of that. So there was no situation that a bunch of kids were lost in the woods also. Like everybody got out, no problem. So they, we get to these buildings, a couple of guys throw a med pack on their back. They run back out into the woods with us. One guy starts doing CPR. The other guy takes us all away from our rabbi and brings us back to the thing. They throw us into a van. They drive us home. Like they just wouldn't, the teachers wouldn't tell us anything. But my dad got home. He's like, so what? Oh, your field trip. And I was like, like, we don't know what happened. Here's what's going on. So he called the school, and it was like one of those situations where I was watching him have this conversation. He's like on the phone. He's like, yeah, hey, it's Dr. Gunzburg. My son was on the field trip today. What? Oh, just, everything just dropped. And he slowly hangs up the phone, and he looks up at me. He's like, I'm sorry, he's gone.
Wow.
And it was just a really hard moment. I mean, it was completely and totally surreal.
Did your dad know him? I'm curious. Did he know this person?
My dad?
That passed? Yeah.
Yeah. He knew him. He knew him. I found out many, many years later. So I'll tell you a couple of anecdotes about the rabbi, because only much later was I able to connect these 5 keys to greatness with the rabbi. But I'll tell you a couple of anecdotes about his life in a few minutes. But the whole thing was surreal, like you said, breaking the chain of trauma and everything. And to some degree, for some people, certainly for myself, I don't know that chain ever gets fully broken.
Fair enough.
But certainly we can do our part to be actively pursuing healthier and better pursuits than what may come just from living in that moment of well, what if, there's this kind of like, I think I was telling somebody the other day on a podcast, sometimes when I'm out there like hiking, because I go hiking and everything, and I still do that, especially once I realized that I wasn't doing that stuff because of this whole thing. I was like, no, I'm going to do it anyways. There's sometimes when I'm out there and I'm like, okay, what if this is the end? Like, what if this is just, God's gonna be like, boom, you're done,
Yeah.
Just like what happened to him. And so like, those are, I think, normal thoughts for people who went through something like this, but those are not normal thoughts. But I do have something I tell myself when I start getting, negative thoughts like that, which is, and, if anybody can use this, by all means, please do. But that is, many things can happen, but only some of them actually do. right? Like a lot of times when people are in a scary situation, you know, some people are scared of flying, some people are scared of, you know, being in a car with somebody else or with this or with that. Like there's all these things that people can like hype themselves up about and be like, well, what if this happens, right? Terrorist attack, you know, what if it happens? You know, what if the worst case scenario happens and all of a sudden like all this stuff, many things can happen, but only some of them actually do. You know, like when I go caving, when I'm sitting underneath
It's so
hundreds of
simple
feet of
but
dirt.
profound, you know. I mean, really. Go ahead, please.
You know, caving also is something that
Yeah.
comes to mind, right? Like I can be under these massive rocks. We're 50, 200, 500 feet underground and stuff. And so like, it's like, well, what if that rock just decides to drop right now? Well, yeah, but many things can happen, but only some of them actually do. And very few of them actually do. So it's, you know, the vast majority of the time, everybody's fine. And so we just have to hold on to that thought and not let our minds psych us out. And we are able to experience so many things of life. You know, so many things that a lot of people just end up being scared of. You know, scuba diving. I had no idea people were so scared of scuba diving until I started getting passionate about it. And people are like, "Ooh, I could never do that. Water freaks me out." And it's like, well, you're in the water, but you're breathing, so you know, no big deal. You know,
You know, it's interesting hearing you talk about this, though, that some things, many things could happen, but only some do. I was actually watching a YouTube video the other day. You familiar with Alex Honnold? I think is his name. He's a
yeah,
mountain climber,
the free
the
climber.
free solo. Yeah, you know, they showed him climbing with another guy. I think it was from Sweden or something like this, and they were up and I mean they were free soloing, and it was I don't recall exactly where it was, but it was a serious slope. And they, you know, and particularly Alex, he talked about these things. You know, people ask him, well, you know, don't you, don't you in fear? And he kind of so much as said that, yeah, I mean, you can get in a car. You know, I don't agree with him that driving a car, yeah, you could get hurt and killed, you know, on any given day, but he just he operates somewhat off that premise. You know, I'm climbing. It's, you know,
I'm not
it's an odd thought.
I'm not a huge fan of his. I'm in shock and awe that he did Yosemite. You know, that he did El
El
Cap and
Capitan,
everything.
yeah,
Absolutely amazing. And he certainly put in the time and the effort.
no
I
question.
don't love that people do things like that because it suggests to other people that free soloing is a worthy pursuit. And free
Good point.
soloing is the type of thing where it's like
Yeah,
literally one mistake and
it's
it's
done.
all
The
over.
margin of error is minuscule.
Zero.
Yeah,
Zero. Like
yeah,
there's a story
yeah,
that I heard of a guy
yeah,
in by Seneca Rocks or
yeah.
something, right? And Seneca Rocks is supposed to be an easy climb, right?
Mm,
Like at the lower end, like much lower end, like 5'4", 5'5",
yeah.
which if you know about climbing, like, you
Yes.
know, Alex Honnold's doing like, you know, 5'11s, 5'12s, 5'15s,
Yeah,
whatever
off
I'm
the
saying, but
charts.
like 5'3s, 5'4s is almost like climbing a ladder. And a guy just decided to free solo it, like an experienced climber, and it's 300 feet up, 300 feet down. He decided to free solo it. He was going up. He made one mistake, the tiniest little mistake on an
Yeah.
ease climb, right? He just
Wow.
slipped, like a rock fell out or something, and that was it.
Yeah.
So you know,
Yeah.
certainly I do not recommend doing things like free
No.
soloing. Um, I
But
guess, you know,
yeah.
coming from my woofer
But it's
background, my
the
woofer,
idea is about his mentality, and I'm
yes,
with you,
yeah,
and especially now that he has a kid, I hear he still does some of that. I'm like, man, I couldn't do that. But the mentality that yeah, that, you know, many things could happen, but only some actually happen. It's sort of how he regulates his thinking about that.
yeah.
Although that's at another level, but I
Yes,
really
that
appreciate your point there.
definitely doing stuff like what Alex
Yeah.
is doing, you have to be very
Nuts.
in control with your
Yes.
brain, because if
Yeah.
you start to psych yourself out and you're halfway up,
Yeah.
that's it. Like
You're
as soon as the
done.
brain starts to psych itself out, like you know, I went up, I wanted to check out, there's this indoor caving gym in Albany.
Mm.
And so I was like an hour and a half away from there doing a wilderness first responder course. And so on my way home, I swung through Albany to go check out this gym. They do not officially allow lights in the caving area. And the caving area is very small, very cramped, like not very small, like it's not that small, but there's some spot, you know, it's more tight than what I'm used to, let's say. And I'm not like a big caver. I've only been a few times.
I understand.
But like I was asking the guy in charge. So first of all, the new caves in New York tend to be more of the crawl spaces, like what they did. And also it's a small space. So they needed to make a lot of caving. So they did this, whatever. So I was talking to the owner and I was like, why don't you like allow lights and whatever, you know, why don't you just, you know, because it'd be a lot easier, it'd be a lot like more approachable and stuff. And he's like, you gotta face your demons.
Yeah. Yeah,
and
there
so,
you go.
and it's no joke. I'm saying like I went in and out of that caving system a bunch of times, being like, going in being like, I'm just going to do this, and then I would get like a little bit in and it'll be like pitch black and I'm feeling around for the next spot, and I'll just get a little bit too nervous and I'd be like, you know what, I'm
Fascinating.
going out. I'm going out. But
Fascinating.
I did make it to the zip line, which was like a little like, so there were these two girls that ended up going around also at the same time. I came out for like a little breather. The owner went in and scared them, woo, and they came out and started not yelling at me, but they were
Yeah.
like, "Did you just make those
Yeah.
noises?" I was like,
Yeah.
"Girls, I do not know you well enough
Yeah.
to
Heck
scare the
no.
hell
Yeah.
out of you in a caving
It would
system."
scare me to do it
But
to myself. Yeah.
yeah, they found the zip line, and so when they
Mm.
found the zip line, I went close to them, called out to them. One of them came over, grabbed me, and we went back over the zip line. And
Wow.
so I did make it over the zip line, so it was really cool. Got the experience, and I would love to go back and just push myself a little bit closer to being able to like go through those. But I mean, it is, like we go through things, but again, mitigated risk is
Yeah.
the way that
Mitigated
I
risk.
like to
You
put
got
it,
it.
is, things that are many people would consider, like most people, if you're talking about rock climbing, like, oh, it's so dangerous. You're like, not
Yeah.
when you're using a rope, and not when you're being careful, and not when you're
Yeah.
following all the rules, and
Yeah.
you're being earnest, which is the mnemonic to remember how to set up the belay line and everything. So like mitigated risk, like
Yes.
we do things that people may perceive as very risky, but overall, technically, if you are careful and following the
That's right.
protocols, are not that risky.
Yeah, and you're really doing your due diligence. I took you off course there, so
Sorry.
let's jump back in. No, that was my fault. That was my fault. But it's this this line that you threw out there is, I think, is really very, very important about the mindset about that. Yeah, all kinds of things could happen, and if you live by that, that's living by fear. So
Yeah.
you have to figure that out. So keep going, man. Keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had this whole thing happen when I was a little kid. Um, it certainly had its effect on me, and a few vignettes on the rabbi's life just to give you an idea.
Mm,
There was a kid who needed to go to high school. So in our culture, most, not, it depends on which, right wing, left wing, whatever, but so people in that area, when they hit 8th grade, they're looking for a high school. They go away to a boarding school where they are supposed to
mm,
sit there and just really grow in the amount of knowledge that they have and the learning
mm,
that they're doing, etc. And so there was this one kid, and so he was usually a teacher for 8th grade, and so he was the one who people would call and say, which high school should I send my kid to? And so somebody called him up one time that said, he needs to go somewhere. We're not sure where to send him. Where should we send him? He's like, I don't know your kid. Never met him before. Like, I don't know who he is. Like, I can't make a recommendation if I don't know him. So for most people, that would be the end of it, right?
interesting.
I don't know him. I can't help you. Goodbye. He said, you know what? Let me do some studies with him. Let me learn with him one-on-one for a while. We'll sit there and I'll learn his style. I'll learn what he's about. I'll get to know him a little bit, and then I can make a recommendation, right? And meanwhile, he has 12 or 14 kids at home or something like that, a lot of kids at home, and he's got his responsibilities as a teacher. He's got all these other responsibilities, all these other things that he's doing, where he's helping poor people, and like all these other things that he's doing, and he's like, I'm just going to
Wow.
make time for that. They say, if you want to get something done, ask somebody who's busy, because if you ask somebody
Yeah.
who's not busy, it'll never get done.
Yeah, that's good.
That's one thing. Another little vignette, and so there was a situation where he helped. My brother was not doing well in the situation that he was in. He needed to go somewhere for 8th grade, and so he made a bunch of phone calls, and he arranged for it that he would go to a school in Philadelphia for 8th grade.
Mm,
Had him, set him up with a place to stay by the principal's house. Like, he had ties to Philadelphia. So just stuff like that. And like, I don't know my brother, I don't think, very well or anything like that, but it needed to happen, and he made it happen.
wow.
And then one other thing, I mean, there's I have a book at home filled with stories like this, but
That's
one other
incredible.
thing that happened was, one of his neighbors was on their way out of town for a family trip. And nowadays cars are newer, more reliable in general, right? And back then cars were a little bit older. People would use them a little bit longer, and they were a little bit less reliable. And so his neighbor like was on their way out of town or something, and the car just died. The
Mm,
whole family's getting ready to go. The car's all packed up. Boom, car's dead. It's like, what do we
wow.
do now? So for a lot of people, it would be the end of it. He walked over. He saw what was going on or something. He heard about it. So he walked over. He said, here's my station wagon. Take the keys, or my van, or whatever he had. Take the keys. Bring it back to me on like Sunday or Monday, whenever you get back. And they're like, but this and that and whatever. He's like, just get out of here. Go. Goodbye. And he just, we'll figure it out on this end. And you've got to get going for your family trip. Just get going. So just a couple of little vignettes about
You're
stuff that he was
describing a
doing.
really good man, obviously a good
Yeah,
teacher, and I assume then this always, of course, contributes. I mean, we don't want anybody that we know to die, but it contributes to the grief that it causes, and perhaps even the trauma as we think about those sorts of things, you know, for you
yep,
and certainly your dad as well. So that's
definitely.
crazy.
So a few years later, I ended up with kids who I love, or still are my friends and everything, but maybe we were all doing a little bit of the wrong things and making some bad choices and stuff. Um, Ended up with a lot. You had mentioned it before. A lot of volatility. Getting in a little bit of trouble with the law. Getting doing allegedly doing things that maybe I shouldn't have been doing and stuff.
Just
Don't
being a
want to
little
admit to
loose.
anything on tape. What was
Right.
that?
Just being a
Yeah.
little loose with life.
Yeah. I was watching a TV show the other day, and somebody said, like, this guy calls up the other guy. He's like, "You admitted to it in your article that we did this thing like back in the, so allegedly."
Yeah.
um, Allegedly doing some things that I shouldn't have been doing and everything, having
Yeah.
lots of, you could call it fun, you can call it whatever you want.
Understand. No.
And then, a transformative moment that I feel was I had moved into a house filled with older Israeli guys, right? They culturally, their families were from Yemen originally, but they had been living in Israel.
Interesting.
And so they had been through a lot of the stuff that I'd been through, when they were, so I was 21, 22 or so. Maybe I was 19, 20, actually. I was like 19, 20 and everything. And they had been through a lot of this stuff when they were younger, but now, they were in their early 30s and whatnot. So like, I was like the little pisher baby brother that they would like, like I would ask one of the guys, "Oh man, can I bum a cigarette?" And he'd like be like, "Here, just take a pack and pay me back, or don't pay me back, whatever." Like they just didn't care. And so a lot of things that I had issues with, not a lot, but a few, that maybe my dad's a psychologist, so I've heard of him like sitting there and treating people in a psychological setting for certain things and everything, and like just living with these people who had this healthy outlook on life and just a different culture and all these other things going on. Like over the course of the year, a lot of these things just resolved themselves, which was a very cool, very interesting thing, because I don't know. I feel like it was just overall like a very healthy place for me to be for as long as I was there, that it just helped me grow and adjust to certain things and helped me turn into the person I am today. And so at the same time, like while they're sitting there and being like, "Why are you doing all this stuff? Like, with the smoking and all the everything else, not the cigarettes, but why are you doing all this stuff?"
Yeah.
They're also sitting there coming over to me when I'm like completely blitzed out of my brain and being like, "You should try this. It's the most amazing thing in the world. Just plain fancy gourmet chocolate with water, because the water doesn't mess up the flavor of it." And I'm sitting there and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this is so good." So they had the perspective of like, you're younger, obviously you're doing this, no problem, but just realize this is not the end all be all, right?
Yeah.
You move past this at some point in time. And so, within a year or two probably of living with them, I was basically done with that part of my life and everything, which was interesting. Fast forward, get married, have kids, looking at what to do with my career, working with a business coach who at one point in time suggested motivational speaking. Also around the same time, I ended up in a juvenile detention center speaking for somebody that I knew. And it was, even though at first glance, when they asked me to come in and speak, I was like, "There's no way I'm going back in there. I have no interest in like being in those places. Like I have bad memories from those places. I'm just not interested." At some point in time, I realized that I could actually talk to these kids from the heart and like tell them like what I had been through. And I was like, I think I really have a responsibility to go, right? A lot of us get selfish with, what we do and don't want to experience. And we forget that, part of the reason that we are the people that we are today is because the adults in our lives said, "You know what, maybe I'm uncomfortable doing this. Maybe it's a little bit hard. Maybe it's too much effort." And, the sleepovers and the scouts and there's a million different examples, right? Like the proms, right? The adults don't necessarily have to sit there and bend over backwards and to give a night off and like all this other stuff to like make these things happen. But because they make these things happen, we have these experiences.
Yes.
And later on, when we're adults, we're able to grow from these experiences. So we have to remember we have this responsibility kind of to give back to the next generation. Anyways, so I realized I had this responsibility. I went and talked to them. One of the most rewarding things that I've ever done. And so so like that, those were all happening right at the same time. And so that kind of solidified that journey to see like where I could go with this speaking thing. And that's the course that I've been on ever since.
That's terrific. Yeah, that's interesting. And, seems like you learned at a fairly young age that you can be a teacher, a speaker, a mentor, and that's pretty powerful, because now, I personally consider you still pretty young, that you are now, but at a, at a whole different level, with bigger audiences, and just, using, and I said it in my opening, using your experiences, this traumatic event, the lessons that you learned now to help other people. So, so very quickly before you get into the book itself, so how did the book come about? And then I would love for you to hear a little bit about the story in the book.
Sure. So the book came about really the 5 Keys to Greatness came about first.
Okay.
We had an opportunity to give my daughter the experience of sleepaway camp before she was old enough to be in sleepaway camp, and in the same camp that her grandmother was the cook in. So like it was like, it's Bubby's camp, so we got the chance to give her that experience.
What is that? What is that?
A Bubby?
The camp. This what did you call it?
Bubby's camp.
Oh,
Bubby is just Yiddish for grandmother. I think it's Yiddish. It's Yiddish. I think it's Yiddish.
Yeah. Okay.
Probably Yiddish. I'm saying because Yiddish has a lot of connections to German, and German would be Oma, but I'm saying I think it's Yiddish. Whatever. I'm saying maybe it's Polish or something. Who knows? Whatever.
No, but you said something about sweep something camp or
sleepaway.
Sleepaway. My bad. Gotcha. Now.
Yes.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
Now.
No. Sorry.
Okay.
So she was a year too young, but we were like, I don't know. When's we know her grandmother's getting older, not younger. So we don't know. At some point in time, she might just be like, I'm not going back to camp. Right. And then she would have lost that opportunity. So we said, we're going to go. This was actually the year before COVID. And then during COVID, she did not go back to camp. So I was like, wow, see, it was the last year, but now she's actually back at the camp, whatever. So we had this opportunity to go to the camp and take my daughter with us. We took it. And in order to do so, I had to sit there and drive a van for the summer. But I was like, I need to come up with a book. I need to write something. Like I was in that mode. So I was like, okay, so I'm gonna have tons of time to think and brainstorm and write and do all the stuff. I did not end up writing the book that summer, but in the van for some 8.5, 9,000 miles, right? So like to California, back, and then back to California again over the course of the summer, I had a lot of time to think and contemplate and listen to books and listen to other stuff, and just, lots of time to muse over things. And while I was doing all this, I was like, what is this? And again, I didn't know what it was called. I didn't know what it was, but like, what are these, like, what's the essence of everything? And so I kept on coming up, and I would have 10 ideas and 5 ideas. And I would be like, no, this really fits into this, and this fits into that. And so like, it was obviously you want the least number possible, but you want them to have the most meaning possible, right? That they really are all encompassing, or as much as possible are all encompassing. And so eventually I ended up with the 5 actual keys to greatness. At the time, I was going with words that start with the letter P. Not that the letter P has any significance or anything, but just because those were the words that I was using.
Okay.
And I was running into this issue that I couldn't remember them myself. Don't tell anybody that. Like I'd have to have notes when I was talking to meeting planners about what they are.
Yeah.
Not because
I understand. I understand.
They're just 5 random words.
Yeah.
So I sat there and got a thesaurus out and just wrote down a bunch of different words for every single one of them, and just tried to look for that mnemonic, that abbreviation and whatnot. And so finally I looked at it and I said, you know what, this will really work, because it's the 5 keys to greatness, and it's the word great that you have to remember. And that makes it really, really, really easy. Yes. So that's how I came up with the 5 keys. And once I had the 5 keys and I wanted to write a book about it, obviously life got in the way for a little bit. So it was a year something later that I was actually able to sit down and actually write the book. Like during COVID, I grabbed that moment and I said, you know what, we're stuck at home. We got all this stuff going on. I'm just going to make sure it happens. And so the idea of the book was never like, I want to write this massive tome that people have to spend hours reading and understanding. Yeah. It was always about, I don't love nonfiction books unless it's written by Malcolm Gladwell, because he writes fantastically. Yeah, most nonfiction books, you pick it up, I get halfway through it, I'm like, this is pretty interesting, but it's just not interesting enough to hold my attention till the end of the book. But one thing that I always noticed is that the nonfiction books that were written in parable form or in fable form, I get through the end no problem.
Yeah. Ooh, I
So I was
can,
like, okay, so
yeah.
I got to write a book and I have to write it as a story. So I mapped out the quick version of the book and everything, putting some conflict in there and some other stuff and everything. And so I had the list of chapters, and then it was just a matter of doing it. And I just cranked out words every single morning. The first thing I did, got my coffee, sat down, and just cranked out as many words as I could. Got up to like 65 something thousand words and everything. Cut it down to 40 something. I think the final count of the actual book is like 45 or 46,000 words or whatever. And went through as much editing of an editing process as I could with the bare bones way that I was doing it. And got the book out August of
Good for you,
2020.
man. Congratulations. Listen, took me 5 years to write my book. It was just, and I actually describe it as as painful. And people ask me, why haven't you written a second book? I said, well, because I get PTSD when I start thinking about it. I mean, it's not easy to write a book unless
Not
you're
easy.
just a prolific, unless you just really have all those tools and skills, and some have a little this and that and the other. So that's terrific. Okay, so would you mind just, I do want to encourage people, and we'll tell them where to get it at the end of our talk here,
Yes.
but can you just give them a summary of the it's a fascinating story, really, and I
Yes.
love
So
that you put the parable together.
yeah. So basically, there's a guy named David. He is in a very tumultuous emotional state, and he gets up and he stands on a cliff. And while he's on the cliff, somebody comes over to him and starts talking to him, um, and just starts, discussing things with him. And he's like, I just want you to go and meet this person. And she's going to tell you about these, I see that you're struggling with something. So she'll tell you about the 5 keys to greatness. And so he goes and he meets this lady, Regina, and Regina sends him off one at a time to go meet different people who tell him about each one of the different keys.
Oh, wow.
And so he goes and he meets the 5 different key holders, and one at one point in time, there's like a little bit of a break, and I'll tell you what the 5 keys are in a second. I'm not holding
Sure.
the secret.
Please.
At one point in time, there's a quick little like side note where he goes and he meets somebody who talks to him about happiness and gratitude, which, while they're not part of the 5 keys, are definitely a part of the 5 keys, if that makes sense, right? They're not keys,
Foundational.
but yeah, foundational, exactly.
Yeah.
Happiness, gratitude, like you got to have it. If you don't have it, like you got to start there before you do anything.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that you have to be happy all the time, just
Right.
to be they just recognize that we have the ability for happiness within us, I think, and that when we're pursuing certain goals, we can be the happiest. Whatever, happiness is a major can of worms. I'm not getting into it right now, but so anyway, so he meets these 5 different key holders. And while he's doing so, he's dealing with his own little health emergency that crops up in like chapter 4 or something like that. The story is made through conflict, and so we have, and it, some of the reviews on Amazon will be like, oh, it's just so trite because he just like tells over the 5 keys, and it's like, hello, that was the whole point of the book. It was not supposed to be this major fiction breakthrough story. It was supposed to be story form, 5 keys to greatness, and that's it. So like, some people didn't like that it was a little bit too contrived, but it was contrived. Like that was the whole point of it, to have just enough conflict to keep you on reading and everything, just enough interest to sit there and cover it. But it's a short read. It's, a few hours to read it. And then towards the end of the book, he goes and he meets the old man again that he met at the beginning of the book. And so that's basically the whole book and whatnot. And he kind of like just wraps the whole thing up into like a nice little package and, delivers it. And then he knows. So the 5 keys to greatness.
Before you get into that, Ari, if I may, because you may answer some of this through some of these other questions before you get into that. I can't wait to hear them that I want to kind of ask here. So first of all, you in chapter 1, you say that it says that you talk about the man feeling troubled, essentially, and that, about the world, about his place in the world, and I want to ask you, and this is going to be an odd question though, and very broad, but why are people troubled? Just like, if of course, if we're talking about something specific, then we understand that, I lost my father. Okay, I'm troubled. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about sort of as you presented it here, that this person couldn't figure out his way in life. He lost his goal. I mean, why are people troubled? How do they become troubled?
We were talking about this a little bit before the show, and I'm not trying to get into the whole conversation again or anything, but I think I think that people have lost their sense of belonging. And
Okay.
I think that's the overarching thing,
I like
that
that.
you know, we have more specific stuff that'll go into it. And you know, there's lots of root causes for this. You know, we're more disconnected than ever because of social media and the internet and things like that. Even though people say, oh, well, I'm connected because I'm seeing stuff. No, we're more disconnected than ever. We're not talking like we used to talk
Mm-hmm.
face to face in person, right? And obviously, you know, having video conferencing tools is amazing because we're able to talk from thousands of miles away.
That's right.
But at the same point, at the same time, we've lost a tremendous amount of this interpersonal interaction. So you know, we're bombarded with, you know, I think the other, you know, this also falls into a part of the social media thing, but we are, I think it used to be, you know, you would see your friend Charlie after, you know, 6 months and everything, be like, hey, what are you up to? And he'd be like, yeah, I just went on this crazy vacation. Maybe he'll pull out a couple of photos, show you the photos, right?
Yeah.
But the next time you're talking to somebody about the amazing vacation they just went on, might be another 6 months from now or 2 years from now, right? Because, you know, you're around people, so maybe this guy went on something, you know, but like it doesn't come up that much. But then we
Right.
might go online and see somebody's Instagram feed or their Facebook feed or their LinkedIn feed, and people are always putting up this this curated version of themselves online.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
And
Yeah.
that helps disconnect us because we're like, oh my gosh, like look what Charlie did, look what
My
Jane
life
did,
sucks.
look what Jack did, and I'm not doing that stuff, so
Right.
therefore, and you know, therefore
Oh
I'm a
man.
failure, or I'm a this, or I'm a that. And so we lose, we've created this incredible sense of displacement, and we don't have the sense of belonging. And you know, and then it's like the internet has brought everything much closer together, which is amazing in many ways, but
In many
also
ways.
terrible in other ways,
Yeah.
right? You know, another I guess symptom of what I'm talking about is, you know, when I was a kid, I bought an Ozzie Smith rookie card from a guy who's like, I'm telling you, he's going to end up in the Baseball Hall of Fame, and it'll end up being worth $500 or $1,000 most likely, right? I paid $30 for it when in the Beckett it said it was $60. So fast forward years and years and years, and I held on to it, right? You know, I thought I was into baseball stuff, whatever. I'm not really that into sports or anything. I've learned that over the years, and I'm very okay with that. But at the time, and I bought it, and I waited years and years and years, and then, you know, a number of years ago, I went to look to see about selling it and everything, and I go on eBay, and basically there's thousands of cards all on eBay of all people who all want to sell it for what they think it's worth and everything. But realistically, when you flood the market like that, the card becomes worth a couple dollars, and
Man,
that's what it was selling for, is a couple dollars, right? And so this is like
that's a great
way back
analogy.
when you
Mm.
have a couple of, you know, each town, each city maybe has a few different card shops, and that's the only place you can really get it. And so, you know, you go into the shop and they're like, well, the Beckett says it's worth 500, I'll give you 300, and then they'll sell it for 450,
Mm.
right? Because there's only a couple available in the entire city. But then all of a sudden you put all of us into one marketplace together, into one eBay or whatever, and everybody's like, oh, I've got an Ozzie Smith rookie card, it's probably worth something, I'll put it up online. Oh, it's only worth $2, right? Because it's a flooding of the market. And so we have this flooding of the brain with the vacations and the
Yeah.
curated versions of ourselves and all this other stuff. And so even though we claim that we're connected, we're really truly disconnected, and we have this constant sense of not belonging. You know, because we've lost that interpersonal connections, and even within our own homes and within our own this. I mean, it's pervasive, it's everywhere, and it just
Yeah.
sucks away at us and pulls away at us. And so I think
Yeah.
I have another program in the works that the goal of it is to kind of address this sense of disconnectedness, address the sense of not belonging and whatnot. But it's unfortunately, with all the other responsibilities that I have, it's kind of been on hold for. I had the idea a few years ago, and I really need to do it, but like, you know, my kids need to eat and stuff.
I mean, you
The
know,
things, you know, take
you
precedence and
know,
stuff.
I don't know why you're concerned about that, but whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I
You
guess,
know,
you know,
but listen, you
here,
know,
just
to
have
your
some
point,
rules.
and to, to your point, and then I want to hear about the 5 keys. That one of my bigger concerns is about virtual reality, and just with this question of it is getting, even now, I just saw something the other day on LinkedIn, some guy doing the VR stuff, and he was cruising down this beautiful river, man, in, you know, Montana or something. And I was like, you know what? If parents, I would say, are not careful, and maybe even adults are not careful, it's going to be very easy to love your virtual world than the real world. And especially kids. I just think for me, it's a real warning that I
Have you ever
kind of throw out there, you know.
have you ever read or listened to Ready Player One?
No.
So
Hmm.
if you're okay with sci-fi type stuff,
Yeah, I
it
love it.
is a fantastic, fantastic book. And the reading is done by Will Wheaton. And
Mm,
so he does a fantastic job of the reading.
mm,
Um, the second book, Ready Player Two, jumps a little bit more into I'm trying to think of how to put it and everything, jumps a little bit more into, you know, very, very, very with the times and like gonna be, you know, fully with the times. But Ready Player
yeah.
One, I as far as I remember it, but it puts you into a world where the virtual world is to many people more important than the real world.
Right.
Um, and you know, you can listen to it just to listen to it, but you can
Yeah.
also listen to it to kind of get an idea
Yeah.
of what that
Yeah.
might look like.
Yeah.
So virtual reality is so cool. Like I've done it a few times. I have a
Yeah.
friend who has a rig. You know, I've taken, when I was doing a camp, I took the camp to it and everything. Like it is very cool, and
And
the
that's
stuff that you can
part of the
experience
problem.
is so neat.
Yeah.
But if right, exactly, if you allow it to become more than a very, very, very seldomly used gimmick,
Yeah.
it's a big question. I mean,
Entertainment.
Facebook right now is working on, they're trying to work on like whatever they call it, the metaverse or something, where
Yeah.
they think that people will start just logging in and being on there all the time and everything. And like we can't cope with the phone that's in our pockets that we can technically click the screen off
Right.
and put away. Why
Right.
would we be able to cope with it when it's
Right.
like, you know, hitting multi senses and everything? So it's a big problem and everything, but
Yeah.
you know,
And the
I'm not.
thing about it, Ari, and I was also, I don't recall his name. In fact, I really wouldn't even repeat his name because I don't want him to get that much more famous. But this dude is arguing, incredibly smart dude, super duper smart, arguing that that AI, robots, whatever, can feel. And I'm just, you know, it, can they talk to me and convince me that they appear to feel things? It's just there. I'm just never going to go down that road. But it's become the real point I'm trying to make here is it becoming so convincing that when you go on to you know, virtual reality or whatever the case might be, it's so smart, it's so intelligent, it can, I think, make young people believe this is the reality. And so, okay, the 5 keys, my man, that I can't wait to hear them.
Yeah, no worries.
Sorry, I think we could get off on a number of topics here,
Oh
but
my goodness, yeah,
I'm
the
gonna
AI,
try to,
the
yeah.
AI topic, the VR world
Oof.
and things like that and everything, that is a
Yeah,
can of worms that
yeah,
needs to be opened up at some point, but I don't know if we need to
yeah,
do it. But
yeah. Maybe
sorry.
not.
The 5 keys, yes. So the word to remember is great, GREAT.
Hmm.
And those letters stand for each one of the keys. So the first one is give, or to provide, basically to
Mm.
be more giving. And that does not just mean money, right? A lot of people are like,
Hmm.
oh, be more giving, more charity, right? It's like, no, there's empathy, there's compassion, there's
Mm.
time, there's you know, focus. There's a million different ways to be more giving. You know, somebody I know recently, their dad was diagnosed with whatever, you know, not going into like lots of details or something, but they're like, okay, I'm gonna redo part of my house so that he has a place to live. And I was
Wow.
like, okay, you're doing this. Like, I want to be like, you tell me how I can help and whatever. And so I went over there and I ended up organizing his basement, right? So on the one
Wow.
hand, you can look at it and be like, what I just organized his basement for? Like, go pay an organizer, you know, like what the hell? Like, but that was the step that he was up to in order to be able to start construction. And so that's what needed to be done. And I wanted to be a part of it. I wanted to help and everything. So like that's what I did. So like, yeah, you could look at it cynically and be like, you should have just hired an organizer. But no, like, you know, this
Mm.
is what we do, right? We were talking before about the sense of non-belonging, the sense of disconnectedness. If you want to feel connected, then when the people around you are needing help, help them. Be a part of that. Be more giving. Okay, so
Yeah.
that's number one.
And to your point, that this drives the greatness in you. I mean, if you want to put it that way, you know, to go hire somebody to do it for you, I wouldn't say that's not a good thing to do. It's a kind thing to do. It doesn't necessarily elicit the greatness in you, though, right? Is that what we're saying here?
Yes, and also sometimes there aren't resources for that. Meaning there are
Sure.
already people
Yeah.
sometimes are like I don't know their situation, you know, but he's
Yeah.
already going to be spending a lot of money to get the construction done,
Hmm.
right? And I
Yeah.
tried to go and help with the demo, but like my schedule didn't work or anything, whatever. Like,
Sure.
but whatever I'm saying. So it's, you know, we do what we can, and don't
That's
feel
right.
bad if you can't do more than what you're able to do. Like you only can do what you can. The second key is reason. or a purpose, right? You want to define a purpose for the major areas of your life. For most people, I tell them this is work and home. For other people, there may be other areas of their life that are very, very important to them that are, and so define a deeper purpose behind that. The third key is engage, to be more engaged and present in the present moment. A version of this, although I don't like to equate the two, I don't think they're the same, but they're similar. Like it's a tool to learn to be more like this, is mindfulness. Other things are like yoga and things like that. But I mean, you can do it just by sitting there and being like, I'm just going to put my phone down for a little bit, and I'm going to be in the moment over here and just be focusing on the people around me. You can do it by just taking a walk in the woods and just paying attention to the trees and everything, like they say, people forget to stop and smell the roses. I was by a family celebration a little while ago, the other day, and there's this massive bouquet of these huge pink roses. And I'm like, wow, I wonder what they smell like. So I go over and there's yellow roses right next to them. I smell the pink roses and I smell the yellow roses. The pink roses were just a beautiful, heady rose smell, and the yellow roses didn't have much of a scent. And people were like looking at me. And so I was like, go smell them. They're like, they smell amazing. And so, people are smelling them also, but we just get busy and we forget, and we don't give ourselves the chance to experience life. And we need to. So that's the third key. The fourth key is amazing, or to be more positive, to have a more positive mindset. And there is a tremendous amount of resources about having and maintaining a positive mindset. The main point not the main point, but one big point that I like to make is to just recognize that there is a difference between wishful thinking and positive thinking, right? There's the stuff that, we can reframe in our mind with a positive outlook and change how we experience it. And then there's stuff that we cannot actually change. I'm on my office. It's in, a nice little loft space on the 4th floor. I can positively think as much as I like. If I climb out of the window and jump, I am not making it. Physics still exists.
That's correct.
So, but the way that we view the world can affect how we experience the world. And so that's why by just changing some of the focuses of some of the focal points of our own experience of the world, we can make a huge difference in our own lives. And then the last key is tenacity, persistence, right? To remain persistent to the very end. Things get hard, things get difficult. We don't know where we're going with things, and we have a lot of missteps along the way, and what many would call failures, and just all these things are happening and whatnot. And the world is changed by the people who recognize that I have to keep on going. If Martin Luther King had thrown in the towel early on, we would not be where we are today. If what's her name, Harriet Tubman, if she had been like, this Underground Railroad threat of death, it's too much, I can't do it, where would we be today, right? I mean, maybe somebody else would have picked up the slack, but she became a truly great woman because she was like, I just have to do it. Like, there's just that, I can't allow this to continue to happen in this way, and I must be a part of this. And so those are, there's plenty of other examples. Thomas Edison, Susan B. Anthony, there's the history is littered with people whose names we know because they remain tenacious to the very end.
Yes. And I think that's a great idea that you're bringing out there, that I wouldn't call it a two-step process, but there's two things that you just mentioned there. That one, really to have the courage to do something, as Harriet Tubman and many others. And then there's the component that you're talking about too. So you jump in there and do it. And then there's the tenacity and the stick-to-itness, that the belief that you gotta see this through. It's that important, you see. And at the end of it is where, and most people, humble people don't look back and say, look what great things I did, but the concept of what happened or what did take place is great, therefore dubs you great, even though you may be too humble to take that in, and that's fine. I think that's important, but but the greatness appears.
One nuance that I would just point out, it's an interesting thing. So in the Bible, there's a line about Moses that says that he was the most humble person to ever live.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I believe that's in the Christian Bible as well. Like I can't
Yeah.
imagine that they
I've
changed it.
probably read it. I say interesting. I've read it a couple of times, but I somehow
Yeah. So
jumped over me.
they talk about this nuance, like, okay, so he's the most humble person who ever lived. What does that mean? That he constantly deflected praise and everything? That he didn't understand that he was the leader of the entire tribe of Hebrews, all 12 tribes, and that he was talking to God all the time? Like he didn't understand all this. And so there's this concept of humility that yes, you know, when people are heaping praise upon us, we want to be humble. Yeah, we want to maybe take a step back and like leave it alone and just get a, you know, because we don't want it to go to our head. But it's also okay to recognize what you've done and to see it for what it is. And that don't let it get, I'm not suggesting you let it get to your head,
I'm tracking with you. Yeah.
But you know, to okay, so I did that, and that was a really big thing, and it took a lot of effort and everything. But I don't want to sit there and like then walk around with my head stuck 10 feet in the air and be like, well, do you know what I did?
Correct.
Oh, okay, so people don't know what you did. It big deal, you know.
Yes.
You know, I was recently at a place, and people kept on going on and on and on about this guy who was like producing this podcast and everything, and like, okay, very nice, beautiful, you know, like I'm just. You know, I have a podcast out, you know, big, and I mean, his podcast that he's producing is very popular in this culture, whatever. But yeah, I have a book out of this out, but like, you know, so I don't know that I'm humble, but you know, some people might feel the need to sit there and jump in and be like, oh, do you know that I wrote? Who cares? You know, big deal.
Yeah.
If it comes up, if it doesn't, like, you know, let them enjoy it.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting idea, and using the idea of Moses, who again, you know, he didn't have to speak about his greatness. You know, first of all, he had a great purpose in that, of course, he was being driven by God, but his greatness, the impact, the outcome stands on its own. Everybody else, you don't need to point it out. Everybody sees it. It's there. You see, it's a very important concept. I want to ask you this before we just got a couple minutes here that before we ask where people can find you and this, that, and the other. There's two things that really caught my attention. It's something I've been thinking about for quite some time. And one of them is, you said, I don't remember if I saw this in your book or somewhere else, but you said it only takes a little light to shine the way. And I wanted to ask you about that because this is something that I think about a lot. And it's the idea that darkness cannot overcome light. It can't happen. Darkness cannot take over light, but light can overcome darkness. But even more, to your point, it only takes a little bit of light to be able to shine and see your way or to impact darkness. I just want to maybe ask you a little bit about what you're thinking there and this concept of you know, we could even be biblical about this and talk about that, you know, that a person doesn't light a lamp and then put it under the bed. You know, they put it on a shelf where everybody can see.
Where it brings more light.
Yes.
So there's a couple of nuances here, a couple of interesting things. First of all, I'll start with, there's a lot of stuff that happens in the physical world that you can look at and draw parables and things like that into the mental, metaphysical, emotional world.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. And then the other thing is in Israel, I was in Israel one time, and there's a spot in Jerusalem where it's a tourist spot, right? It's called Chizkiyahu's Tunnel. And I'm not sure the English version of his name. If you know it, please share everything. Yeah. Maybe it's Hezekiah or something like Hezekiah.
Where is it? In Israel, whereabouts
in Jerusalem? It's in the old city.
Okay.
In the old city.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah, actually, I've been.
So basically, like, you know, many years ago, there was an army that was coming to conquer Jerusalem, and the well was outside the city, and they didn't know what to do. So they sat there and they had like a team of people work for, I forget exactly how long, but they made a tunnel that was some mile, 2 miles long or something through a mountain, right? I'm saying, like, these are people sitting in, you know, with a little, nothing but a lamp and everything, and pickaxes, sitting on top of each other and just chopping away at this rock.
Wow.
And they created this passageway that went through that led the water from there into the actual city. And so now it's a tourist thing where, like, the water comes up from the spring and it goes through, and you can barely walk through it and stuff, because in some spots you have to duck down a little bit, and you know, it can be very narrow in some points. You don't have to crawl through it. You can walk through the whole way, but like, again, sometimes it's a little bit shorter than others. And by the way, just to talk about this, is very cool. like, I believe it was a miracle that happened because they tunneled from both sides of the mountain, right? I mean, we're talking about 2000 something years ago, right? They tunneled from both sides of the mountain and they met up in the middle, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty unique
Yeah.
because it's not always that you're going
A
to end
lot of
up being
rock in
able
that area too, by
a
the way.
lot. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
it really
anyways,
is.
the tourist agency or whatever that we had paid to go through this thing, how do they give you light? They don't give you a giant flashlight. They gave you a teensy tiny little, like, powered by a tiny little battery, like promotional product type thing that you put on a keychain that has one tiny little LED on it. But when you're in the middle of this tunnel and it's pitch black, that's literally all you need.
That's
A
powerful.
tiny little bit of light, right? And you can turn it off for a second and experience total darkness, but you turn it on and you can see your hands, you can see your face, you can see the person in front of you. Do you see them very well? Is it everything brightly lit like you would have in a studio? Of course not. But you can see every single thing that you need with a tiny little bit of light. And so I think that there was some version of that experience that came to the forefront with this. And again, like we were saying before, everything in the physical world, or almost everything in the physical world, has a parallel or something to learn out from it in the metaphysical, mental, emotional world. And so this was a little nuance that I brought out from that. But it's a
yeah,
great experience if you're ever in the area,
yeah.
as long as you're not too claustrophobic. And then
Yeah.
while we're talking about not being able to see anything, there's another really cool museum, and there may be others in the world like it, but if you happen to be in Israel, this is a great spot to go. It's in an area called Holon, Holon. They have a children's museum and they have a blind museum there, and it gives you like an hour or so experience.
Oh
And they
my.
put you into a place where they basically make you blind.
Oh my
They
goodness.
pull every single source of light out and you cannot see a thing. And somebody who has some version of visual impairedness leads you around. And it is such a mind trip. You can't see anything. And they're like, okay, now you got to feel this. And you're not entirely tripping over things, but you're tripping over things and you're going through these scenes, and it's a car, it's a busy street, it's a bedroom, it's a closet, it's a boat, it's a this, it's a whatever. And it's just so cool. Terrifying and like very tripped out. But and like on the way out, they bring you into a little cafe where you sit down and you make an order from the guy who can't see, or the girl who can't see, and they bring you over whatever you order and everything, and you still can't see anything. You're sitting in this booth and you like start eating and you like can't see the money. It's just crazy. A wild experience.
Well, to all those who are listening, and you and I talked, my wife and I had the great honor and privilege of being posted in Israel for 3 years back in the 90s. I don't know if that was there at the time, but
I don't know if it was open.
We certainly intend to go back, and I'm going to put that on my list because that just sounds like a powerful idea. But just to wrap this up, this idea that you're talking about this little light, that does become a very important metaphor and lesson in life that you can sometimes, even using your ideas from the 5 keys, that sometimes for other people, perhaps, maybe like the story in your book where the gentleman came out of the woods, I guess, and you could say that he just sparked a little light that allowed this man to begin to see. Like you said, he didn't see everything, or whatever the case might be. And this is the beautiful thing that I hope that all my listeners take away from what you're saying and what we're talking about here now is that, to have purpose, to help other people. Sometimes it's not this great thing. It's just a little light, if you will, that you're shining for other people. So I'll ask one more question then very quickly. And then you also mentioned about regret not, but learn from your mistakes. And I just want to hear a word or two about that from you. Again, I don't remember if that was in your book. These are my notes.
I think it's something I say a lot. It's probably I think it's probably in the book. There's a lot of things that I guess in my life that you could say that I wish that I had done or done differently.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody. Right. Yeah. Right. 100%. And so we could live a life of regret and being like, oh, I wish I had done that. I wish I'd done that. Man, if only I had done that. Or we can live a life of, well, I didn't make the decision to do that back then. Maybe I was scared. Maybe I was nervous. Maybe I felt like I had to be more responsible. I mean, and these are just bringing up, ideas from what I actually experienced. But we can take that and we can learn from it. So now if there's an opportunity to do something and maybe I'm a little bit scared to go do it, well, I think I'm just gonna have to get over that fear and go do it, because I don't know when I'll have that chance again.
Yeah.
And that's one new, I'll tell you a quick story about that.
Please.
There is a ritual bath in northern Israel. We've been touching on Israel a lot this time, but there's a ritual bath in northern Israel. They claim that, like, by going in that ritual bath, the rabbi who had established it a few hundred years ago, like, he'll make sure that you don't go back up, that you don't leave this earth without doing, in Hebrew it's teshuva, but like repenting, like without like, repenting and like unlocking and like, basically like attaining your own version of like, the world to come. And so when I was a kid and I was in Israel, I wanted to go, but I didn't make the effort to go. Like, we ended up there with a tour. There wasn't enough time to go. I was there, whatever, maybe I was going to go up north, but I never ended up jumping on a bus to go up north and do it. And then, like, I was there a number of years later after I was married, and I should have gone for 5 months, but I didn't. And then, like, the last night that we were there, I had a friend of mine, we were going to like rent the car and drive up and jump in the bath and jump back in the car and drive back down to Jerusalem and everything. It was just too much. And I was like, I can't do it.
Yeah.
So then in 2020, so this dates back to 2004 or 2005, which was the first time that I was there. And so now it's 2020 and I'm like, okay, I'm here. I went with, a brother-in-law and a nephew, and we ended up spending the night up there. And I was like, I was exhausted. We were up all night, we're up really late. We're not sleeping necessarily well because we're traveling and everything, like all this stuff is going on. And I'm like, I don't care. I'm getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning and I'm going down there because, like, we were supposed to leave the town by like 9 or something. So I got up at like 6 a.m. or something, and it turns out I got a sunrise over the mountains of Safed, which was beautiful. Walked all the way down because it's on a mountain. You got to walk all the way down. Went to the thing, dumped in the bath and everything. And I was like, it was just such a feeling of accomplishment, because for 15 years I had been wanting to get into this ritual bath, and I didn't. And then I made the effort and everything. And like the other people there were like, I don't know, whatever, cold, it's cold water, it's this. And I was a little nervous about how cold the water was, because it's not heated, it's directly fed from a spring, and it was the winter.
Yeah.
So it's actually interesting, because if you go in the winter, the water is actually warmer than the air. So it's like you get in, you're like, oh, and then you get out, you're like, whoa. If you go in the summer, the water's freezing, right? It's the same temperature. It's just the relative temperature. Anyways, so that's the, regret. If we can learn from it, then we can change it. If we regret it, then we just sit there stewing in regret and focusing on what we didn't do as opposed to what we did.
One way or the other, yes. Leave the regret behind by either just one, there's some things you just have to let go of. And then there's other things that you have to make a decision to use it, to do something about it, and, and propel yourself forward, as you so well lay out in this book. Well, listen, Ari, please share with the audience, where they can find you, where they can find your book. This will all be in the show notes, but I still want to ask where you would like to point people.
The best way to get in touch with me is my main website, arigunz.com. That's Guns with a Z, so it's ARIGUNZ.com. Excellent. That will have links to social profiles and information about me and everything else. When we're recording this, it's a little bit under construction, but don't worry, like the information typically is there. And then as far as the book goes, I do have the first 2 chapters available for free download on the website littlebookofgreatness.com. So just spelled exactly normally, not just plain old littlebookofgreatness.com. Nice.
No, that's terrific. And of course they can go to Amazon and pick it up there, which is where
Amazon and a few other websites also.
Yeah, that's terrific. Well, listen, man, thank you so much. I appreciate not just your time, but really sharing your insights, your vulnerability of telling the difficulties you've had in your life, but how you've turned those into really strengths, and might I say, good lessons for all of us to learn. So Ari Gunzburg, man, I appreciate you so much. Thanks for taking the time.
I greatly appreciate you having me on the show. Thank you, Kevin.
That's a pleasure.